Mason and I are here to give a little reaction to what happened tonight in the NBA draft lottery. We'll also be having a guest on later on some draft prospects. So check us out. Thanks for joining this, and let's get it going.
The New Orleans Pelicans select Zion Williamson.
And Holiday, the dribble penetration, so tough going to the goal.
All right. Hello, everybody. I might have to adjust my audio here in a second.
You good?
Looks like we're good.
You good?
All right. Mason, hello. Hi. How's it going? I'm glad we were able to get together tonight and have a little vent session about what just happened. We had a live watch party at Sports Drink. Shout out Sports Drink. We had, we have some awesome comments coming in. We'll get to those in a second. Shout out Sports Drink. Shout out WWL Seth for covering the event for us as well. And, shout out Jake Madison for also kind of helping set that up too. Just a lot of good Pelican stuff going on right now. Yeah, what was your watching medium in Detroit?
Look, I'm impatient, and so I knew that whatever I was streaming wasn't gonna be. I knew I'd find it on Blue Sky before I actually watched it. So I didn't even watch it. I was just like scrolling, and then saw it, and I was like, well, this tracks with the last few months of this franchise. So yeah, I was just kind of religiously checking Blue Sky to see when the news dropped.
Yeah. So we were at the party, and obviously the countdown ends, and Mark Tatum gets up there, starts pulling out the cards or whatever. He starts working down, and the first thing, I think the Spurs were 14, and everyone's like, "Yeah, sigh of relief, good job, Spurs didn't jump up in the lottery." But that was the one that they were getting from Atlanta, and there was someone there, Nathan Stevens. He had the list of teams in order, so we were making sure we could keep track of who jumped up or not. And eventually, it comes in, and I think the first team we learned that's jumped. What was it? Who was it? Was it the Spurs? Was the first team that we learned that jumped?
It wasn't Dallas
with their own pick? Oh no, it was Dallas. Oh yeah. It was Dallas very, very quickly.
You've already wiped it out of your memory.
Oh no, because I don't want to talk about Dallas, man. Oh, Dallas is terrible. God damn. Well, so yeah, we figured out Dallas has jumped, and then we find out San Antonio's jumped, and Philly has jumped, and it's got the pick number 8, and 8 was the absolute worst the Pels could be, right? And when it wasn't the Pels that came up on 8, there was like a sigh of relief. It was like, oh yeah. Not the Pels, wasn't 8. It's not the worst case scenario. And then he gets to 7, and pulls out the card, and the fucking Pelican sign, just like, oh no. There was just like the air. You could feel the air go out of the room. So bad. But people had obviously put together at that point. Philly had jumped. And it means 3 teams from outside the lot, the top 4 slots were jumping in. And every single team in the top 4 slid back a spot relative to where their odds were. And the only amount of solace that I can take is the fucking Utah Jazz. They got 5. So the affront to basketball that they put on this past year, tanking shamelessly the way they did, securing the worst record in the league, they got the 5th pick. So good on them. But yeah, man, when we found out it was the top 4, everyone was like, all right, as long as San Antonio and Dallas, the 2 division rivals, are not 1 and 2, it'll be fine. It'll be okay. And then the first card to pull out, it's like the Hornets, and you're like, oh my God. And then it's Philly, and you're like, oh no. And yeah, everyone just kind of lost it from then on. So yes, immediate reactions. Cooper Flagg, potentially a Dallas Maverick. Dylan Harper, potentially a San Antonio Spurs. Yes, I see those eyebrows raising, because we'll get into all the weird possibilities that are now on the table. And obviously Pelicans 7th pick.
So I was just, you said your worst case scenario, and I was like, man, so my buddy talked me off the ledge on this one. I was like, man, and even the Bucks could be good if the Bucks trade Giannis and get Cooper Flagg or something like that. And I had to be kind of reminded that even with transcendent stars the first year or even first couple years is a slog, right? And so if that happens, I mean, the Bucks got to be thrilled, right? Because now both teams, top two, could potentially want to trade their pick for Giannis. And so just because of where those franchises are positioned, Dallas with AD, they're not trying to rebuild. And then, the Spurs with Wemby, there is no timeline, right? You could just go for it right now. But so if that happens, maybe it's a little bit better for the Pelicans with the Bucks picks in mind, because rather than trying to go tread water and trade for other players who can play right now because they don't have any picks, maybe they are building towards the future, and that makes the next couple of years picks better for the Pelicans, the swap and then pick in 27. But that's where my good news ends. I don't know any other good news from this.
Yeah, I think immediately everyone sort of jumped to these trade scenarios and like what can happen, what kind of possibility is there. And then look, we're going to spend a lot of time covering this, and I think there's going to be a lot of news that comes outside the NBA draft combine, which is happening in Chicago right now. You see all these measurements that have come out. We'll talk about those in a second here. There's going to be a lot of news that's going to come out of the combine. A lot of smokescreen. This is prime time smokescreen season. When you see the Houston Rockets say they have faith in Jalen Green and they do not want Devin Booker, that is prime time smokescreen season. And so, I do think that like I said, everyone talks at the combine. We'll get a greater sense of like what direction the Pelicans kind of want to head in. The Pelicans themselves now probably have a greater idea of the possibilities available to them as opposed to, if they were 1 and 2. I think that's something we talked about. So the first, the trade scenario that people kind of get into before we get into the Giannis stuff is, what do you do with pick number 7? Do you use pick number 7 to go hunting, to add to this current core and to this team?
I mean, you've got to start entertaining that possibility. There's no, yeah. I mean, like I think this, and I think it's not just should you, this ownership group, this front office. I don't know. I kind of feel like that's what they're going to do. So I guess we'll see. But like, and even there's even kind of like the doomsday, relatively speaking, scenario of trying to attach it to DeJounte to get off that contract. And obviously you're not paying the 7th pick to get off DeJounte probably, but like trading it with DeJounte and getting something of value in return. Like I think the odds of this pick getting moved went way up based on a lot of results.
Yeah. So I think, are you thinking more so they could go any direction with this, not just like they go get a win now piece, but also
right.
Like maybe they just like look, there's like, for example, like Brooklyn has 4 picks in this draft, right? None of them are fantastic. The 8th is their best pick, and then they have a bunch of like other picks or stuff. Like if Brooklyn's offering you something to move up from 8 to 7, do you entertain that? Or, is there a team at like 10 or 11, or I forget, how this all played out, are one of these teams willing to take on DeJounte for you to move back like 3 spots? Like, like how are you kind of ranking those kind of things? And I think that's a conversation we'll get into with our guest that's going to come into on the pod here in a few, on like just how he views like the prospects in that range. The other thing is like, let's turn it over to the Giannis stuff. Should the Pelicans now try to make a run at Giannis themselves? And
yes, why not? Like, come on.
And how would you stack their like potential offers? So like my potential like package that you would offer is it starts with Zion, and it includes the Bucks selections and this number 7 pick. That plus, I guess my intent would be to not give up any of the Pels' own future picks. I would try to move off the Indiana pick. I would try to include like Hawk and Misi or something like that. How does that stack up against like this potential offer of maybe the Spurs coming with the number 2 pick, or I guess even Dallas coming with the number 1 pick?
Yeah, I mean the Pelicans won't outbid. There are a number of teams the Pelicans can't outbid. I mean the Thunder they can't outbid. I don't think they can outbid either of those. I got to look and see what the Dallas's actual pick. Like, I know they don't have a ton of picks. Or I mean, they don't have their full arsenal, right? But the Spurs and the Thunder, like it's a fun thing to talk about. And obviously, the Pelicans have a unique card to play with the Bucks' future picks there. But also, it's not like they have a ton. They have 1 swap and one first rounder. And so, I just don't see a realistic scenario where they're letting Giannis. But they could certainly play in as a 3rd team.
Yeah, I mean, I think whenever you're a middleman in any kind of deal in life, you have to consider the possibility of why should you just be the middleman? Why not just make the deal directly, right? Like, why can't you just get in on this from the get go? Um, you can't make a Giannis move without having enough left over to be a contender. You can't make a Giannis move and ownership refuse to pay the tax. So like those are two big obstacles in any kind of Giannis move. But to your point about getting into the facilitation game, I think that's where the possibilities get super exciting to me. So do you remember where Houston ended up going? Houston ended up getting 10. Yeah. So Houston got 10 from Phoenix. So Houston is the team that's been kind of rumored to go after Giannis, or is going to. Every single team is going to go after Giannis, but Houston is like the team that everyone's like, "Hey, I think they're going to make that pursuit." They're armed with the 10th pick. They obviously have Şengün, Amen Thompson, Jalen Green, all these like a litany of young players. They have all the Phoenix picks. To my understanding of how Houston's going to choose to operate, and maybe they won't have a choice here, because anytime you deal with a star, you're kind of limited to what's available to you. But my understanding of how Houston's wanting to operate here is like Amen Thompson's just not on the table, period. And I know they're going to try very hard to keep Şengün off the table, but that one is like less firm, right? So like Houston is a team that could very much get in onto the Giannis stuff. But anytime Milwaukee is moving Giannis, they have to look ahead of them the next year and be like, okay, we might not be good next year. We might not be good the following year. And who controls those draft picks? The Pelicans do. So when you look at Houston, and let's even throw San Antonio in there, the Dallas one, I think you're right. They don't have enough draft picks to and other weird assets to kind of make this interesting. Like Milwaukee would really have to love Cooper. Or I guess like Dallas would have to like move off of like Anthony Davis and just kind of like completely restructure a team in some other way. And I just don't see him doing that. But like San Antonio, for example, they have interesting young players. They got Stephon Castle. So they have De'Aaron Fox. Obviously, those two guys are at the guard position. So drafting Dylan Harper's maybe like a redundancy there. But they also have a bunch of picks coming in from other teams. They have salary that they can match any which way. And Keldon Johnson, Devin Vassell. They could be a team that also gets it on the Giannis stuff. And so if you look at Houston and San Antonio, do you see enough pieces there to where you're like, okay, I'd be willing to give up controlling Milwaukee's draft future for whatever these teams are able to get me?
I think maybe Houston a little bit more than San Antonio. I think if the last years have taught us anything, it's like you can't bank on these picks turning into something, right? Like we saw this with the Lakers, and even with some of the Bucks, picks early on. I mean, there was always this hope about, these teams, that far out, they're gonna, this pick's gonna be awesome, and like even in those situations, the pick may not be that awesome, right? Today's a perfect example, right? You could have like great lottery odds to have a top 3, top 4 pick, and then congrats Wizards and Jazz. You're kind of stuck in top in 5th and 6th. So yeah, I mean, like I think you absolutely keep the door open for something like that. I think again that if you're talking about trying to be more competitive more quickly, Houston's the team to that would probably be better. But yeah, I mean, like I'm not married to these picks at all. Anything's on the table for me.
In that vein, we have a question here from Anuri. If the Spurs made number 2 available, would you trade up? So I think the answer to that is yes, because we don't know the cost of it. But my question to be is like, how aggressive would you be in the pursuit of trading up? For example, is 7 and the Milwaukee stuff enough or is it too rich for you?
Yeah, I do that.
So there is one little thing about the Milwaukee stuff that's interesting language, and I'll have to call somebody with the team or the league on this and figure out like what the options are here. But the 2027 pick that the Pelicans own, the language on that one is they own the best or the better of the Pelicans or Milwaukee's pick. And the worst of that one is going to Atlanta. And that was traded in the DeJounte trade. And so I don't know how trading that pick with those stipulations works, because if it's one of those situations where you can only trade it with those conditions attached, you are now trading your own safety net away, because it's the better of your own or the Bucks pick. So if the Pelicans are terrible in 2027 and they luck into the number 1 pick, that pick could potentially be traded if you choose to trade that pick with that language attached. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know if they can.
In 2026, you mean, right?
No, the 2027. 26, they have a swap outright.
Right. Oh, okay. Sorry. I thought you were talking about the swap. Okay. Now I'm following you. Gotcha.
Yes. So in 2027,
Yeah.
the way it's worded is that Atlanta's going to get a pick, and it's going to be either the Pelicans pick or the Bucks pick, but it's going to be the worst of the two, and the Pelicans are going to get the better of the two.
Right.
Right. So the Pelicans, instead of having 2 picks in that draft, they traded one. They had 2. They traded one of those picks, but they're like, we're going to keep the better one, whatever it ends up being.
Yep. Yeah.
So I don't know what the legality of retrading that pick is. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
To my understanding, it'll be with those conditions attached, and that one's a way more difficult pick for me to trade.
Yeah. Yeah. I hear that. Because I also the implication likely with if you're trading up for Dylan Harper is that you're probably not. You're taking a step back right now in the near term, right? Like you're maybe not necessarily going for it and trying to stay, remain super competitive. If you're trading assets to go get him, but that's an assumption on my part, I guess. I can see why there'd be if that's the play, right? Then maybe you're not going to be quite as good next year. But I don't know, a lot of moving parts.
Yeah, the problem is there's not really, really good precedent from jumping outside of the top 5 into the top 3, like in terms of a trade up, right? The closest thing you really have is the Lucas thing with Atlanta, like they like the 5 and 3 thing, and then they traded a future thing that ended up being 10. I think Cam Reddish went 10, or it ended up being 8. I think, one of the two. It ended up being one of those two, 8 or 10, whatever. Yeah. And so maybe, that's how you could look at it, is like if you thought that, Harper is that level of a prospect, you would be fine giving up that pick. But that's difficult. That's a difficult proposition for me. I don't know. I don't know that I would. That's tough. That's super tough. Yeah. How do you? So I think now the Pelicans are kind of like at a juncture where they have to decide what kind of team they have to be next year. And given the available information in front of you, Mason, if you were running the show, what direction would you take the Pelicans?
I guess I would. I'm concerned about trying to do too much to get off of DeJounte Murray's contract. So that's the first thing. Because that everything kind of rests on that for me is what does that cost of doing that? Because otherwise I think let's start with Zion, right? I think we both are kind of on the same page that at least what I understand to be true is that we both want to keep Zion and aren't looking to kind of just trade him because we have to. So I would like this team to kind of keep Zion, keep Trey, and try to be good. But at the same time, that's kind of where I'm at. Like I'm not trying to hit the reset button quite yet, but I feel like that hand's going to be. We're going to see what happens there, and that hand might get played by the current ownership group, and we can do nothing about it. But I don't know. I feel like this past season was a season from hell, and I would very much like to see this team be good again, even if they're not. Even if there's the.
So are you under like the baseline assumption that like, look, okay, DeJounte's going to miss whatever time he's going to miss, but like outside of that, this is still a decent team. Like next year, like if they kind of kept. Oh God, this dude calling in from a cruise. What kind of internet does he even have on a cruise? Hello, Jeremy.
None. The answer is none.
No. This is the very standard J-Dub internet connection. I don't think it's
That
changed.
hurt. Okay.
I think we bullied him off.
Oh my god.
I think we lost you, bro. Yeah, we'll. Sorry, Jay. I think we're gonna have to keep you in the chat. Yeah, and we'll leave him on here for a second until Chuck pops in. But yeah, I guess I don't even know what my train of thought was. Oh yeah, what you would do if you're trying to like run a team. I think one, James in the chat here is right. The league kind of told you that tanking won't be rewarded, and I think there's elements of truth to that. In that like, look, all 4 teams that were the 4 worst teams in the league, none of them got to like move up in the draft at all, and in fact, all of them slid with regards to their lotto odds.
Yep.
But the other thing that also kind of remains true is that in this new era of the CBA with all the aprons and all the restrictions and all that, there is no better pathway to building a team than through the draft. Like there is, if you go into this pursuit of making your team very, very expensive, very, very quickly, you run out of runway. And now you found yourself locked into a group with not much mobility because these teams are not accepting these contracts anymore without compensation. I mean, we saw how hard it was to move a Brandon Ingram who wasn't expiring, right? Like the Pelicans had, I think not the Pelicans, sorry, the Bulls trying to move like Vucevic and they just couldn't, right? There's so many other teams that are in similar situations where they just couldn't move folks. And I think that's difficult. So you have to keep an eye on like, how good is this team, how good is this team going to be if they choose to try to be good? And is it worth trying to like sit on that treadmill for forever? And so that's where I guess that's what I was asking you is like, do you think this team is like good enough to pursue playoffs next year?
I do. And look, then if you're banking on DeJounte coming back and being useful, then I guess I'm okay with going for it next year, but no more half measures. Like I think the hardest part for me, and maybe it's good that J-Dub's not on this because he might be disagreeing with you right now, but but like what the Pelicans did this year, I think they waited too long to pull the plug on everything. And so I think I'm okay with them trying to go for it again, but understanding if shit's not going to work and immediately making a decision and sticking with that decision at that point versus just kind of treading water as long as you possibly can until you're kind of directionless, right? So I think that's how I would do things differently this time around.
Yeah, I think that point is spot on because again, just going back to this idea of like, okay, building through the draft, I would still try to position yourself to have as many cracks in the draft as possible, right? That doesn't mean that you yourself have to be like the worst team every year. You don't have to pull a Utah every year, but you got 7 this year. Like it is what it is, right? Whatever. Can you get in on this Giannis stuff where, like, let's assume the mandate to move Zion is still there. We haven't heard anything otherwise, but let's assume that's still there. Let's get into that in a second. And also we're getting guests. Dub, I'm gonna have to kick you off, bro. I'm so sorry.
I can't be heard.
Oh, I can hear you now. Hello.
Yeah, now I can hear you.
Yeah, there we go.
Okay.
Hello, everyone.
We're gonna give you your space to say your piece, and then we're gonna bring our guest Chuck on here too. So get it off your chest, baby.
Absolutely. All right. Actually, Mason, I heard you, and I agree 100%. We need to try. They need to try and win. And the last 2 teams who went to 1 were 10 and 11 in draft lottery odds. They went to the play-in. They tried to win. They need to attempt to be a winning team with a winning organization. And if they land on the stars of the top 4 lottery, so be it. But yes, they need to try to push their chips in, no half measures, and then go in. I just wanted to say hello to everyone, and I butted in. And after that, I'm going to kick myself off. I'm going to leave. But I just wanted to say hello to you guys as we
tell
all
everybody
wallow
where
from
in the
going from 4 to
world you're
7.
located right now. Where are you geographically?
I am on the water. I'm in the Gulf of Mexico. Mexico. Um, Heading to Costa Maya,
Hell yeah.
and we are enjoying ourselves right now. I'm under moonlight in a cabana, trying to live the life.
That's so much better
But
than the night that
just one
everyone's
to
having around the Pelicans.
keep.
So
Hey, somebody gotta be relaxing while we all in sorrow. All right.
Amen.
hell yeah.
Thank
Shout
y'all
out.
for letting me have my piece, and I'm gonna mute myself, and then y'all go ahead and do your thing.
Yeah. Shout out to
Hey, bud.
Jeremy for making the call in from all the way in the Gulf of Mexico. We're gonna bring on Chuck. Welcome to the show, Chuck. Chuck of Chucking Darts podcast does excellent draft coverage and draft work. And if you guys have not had the pleasure to listen to his podcast, please do, because he brings on very fun and informative guests, and obviously he has great takes of his own. Chuck, how you doing, man?
Oh, I'm doing well. Thank you so much for having me on, guys. I guess your mood is kind of somber. I don't know if this is a happy time, but I'm here to make it happier. Thank you.
Oh, we love that. This podcast, we just
need
had
it.
a lot of fun. There's not much great that goes the Pelicans' way, and so we find a way to make light of that and have fun. So I'm excited that you're kind of with those vibes, and appreciate you hopping on short notice here.
Hey, you know that you've been kind enough to come on my podcast, and any fan of Trey is a friend of mine. We all know that. So yeah, let's get into it, man. What can I do for you?
Mason, I'm gonna turn it over to you to kick us off here. Just I'm gonna turn it over to you, and then I'll get into my questions.
Yeah. I think we got to start by giving our listeners some hope here. And so I think the prevailing wisdom was that you've got a couple top tier picks, one obviously being much higher than the other, but a couple top tier picks, and then there's some drop off, and especially when you get down to where the Pelicans now are at 7. And so I guess, what's your overall just kind of broad take on the value of the pick, even before you start talking about the players, based on how you view this draft compared to other drafts, and then I guess just general thoughts around the silver quality of talent, where they're at. Yeah, it is a very funny class. It's like a good news, bad news thing. I think Cooper obviously is 1. Dylan will be picked 2nd, and I think there is actually a bit more of an argument to make about whether he belongs in a tier by himself or not. But I think in terms of traditional, like, easy to identify archetypes, yeah, there's a drop off after that. There is not a clear lead guard initiator. There is not a clear blue chip wing. And so in that sense, yeah, there's a drop off. Now, the good news about that, though, is that whenever there's a wide range of opinion about, sort of who should go, in this case, 3rd in the draft, and there's this perception that there's a giant cluster, it increases the chances that at 7, you will get the 3rd best player in the draft, because it increases the chances that teams ahead of you will pick the wrong guys. In this case, in terms of how good that cluster is, I think it is. I've compared this class to 2021 before, which is a class that's aging very well for the Pelicans, class, obviously. Yeah, a very seismic class for New Orleans. But in that class, you had Mobley and Cade, which I'm not, I don't want to go on a tangent comparing Flagg to Mobley, Harper to Cade. But like in terms of the clear kind of archetypes of positional size, one an initiator, one sort of a second banana offensively. Again, not going to go on a tangent, but like you have those 2 blue chip guys, even though Mobley didn't go in the top 2. And then after that, you had a bunch of bets to make, except in 2021, the bets were on wing-sized players. And in this class, the bets tend to be more on sort of like hybrid big kind of guys like Derek Queen or Colin Murray Boils, those kind of guys. And that makes it like
less archetypal, to reuse that word, but still some really good bets. And I think what I would expect to happen in that draft, in those first 6 picks after those 2 guys go, I think it is likely that VJ Edgecombe will go somewhere in the top 6. I think it's likely Trey Johnson goes somewhere in the top 6. And I think it's likely that Ace Bailey goes. Now, like, again, you can find skeptics of any one of those players, but I think if I'm a betting man, all 3 of those guys are going to be gone in the next 4 picks after Cooper and Dillon, which in my opinion means that there's a strong chance that, assuming y'all keep your pick, that you will have the chance to end up with one of Derek Queen, Kaman Malawatch, or Khan Knippel. And I think if you end up with any of those 3 guys, you should feel pretty good. Khan is the one that sort of I keep returning to. I don't know if I'll end up having him over Derek. I've gone back and forth. But Khan is the talent in this class that is very rare and sort of defies easy categorization. Derek a little bit too, but Derek is a big with ball skills. We've seen bigs with ball skills before who is not really interested in protecting the rim and thinks he's a guard. And Derek is just sort of he just happens to be right about his guard skills, but we've seen that sort of mentality out of bigs before. Khan is a real contradiction. And a couple episodes ago, I did an episode with one of my recurring guests, Brian Geisinger, who does great work scouting and covering the ACC all season. And we talked about Khan as if we were to make a star argument for Khan, what does that really look like? And Brian talked about, casting him in sort of a Derek Booker mold, possibly. I was more interested in what Khan could do in space as a passer, because in that Duke scheme, he wasn't asked to be much of a playmaker, but when he did make plays, usually with, a 2-man game with Kaman or with Cooper, his passes were on target and they were out very quickly. He has a very, very, very high feel for the game. And in terms of just shooting and scoring efficiency, he's one of the best freshmen of the last 5 years. I mean, he had a 64 true shooting percentage, which is absolutely insane. But because his usage was only 20, and because he's this rosy-cheeked kind of stocky white kid, he doesn't fit traditional casting. And that means that people just frankly don't quite know what to do with him. They want to rank him in the top 10, but I think a lot of evaluators their palms are a little bit sweaty about ranking him in the top 3 or 4 because of whatever, probably a deficiency in lateral agility or whatever. But all that kid does, all he has done in his career is win. Duke was a great team all year, and he was their second best player, on most nights. And before he got to Duke, he was more of an initiator, and he did very well in that role too. So if you wanted to find some upside, usually when you go back and you look at guys who are taken later who end up popping really, really hard, it's that they had some really, really promising shooting and feel indicators, but they didn't quite fit the athletic mold. And that's what I think Khan has a chance to be. So if he's there, I would love, if you pair him with Trey Murphy, you have 2 shooters of that caliber on the floor together, then I think you've really got something, especially if you end up keeping Zion. But I think either Queen or Malawatch as well I could get into. But I think you all are cooking at number 7 as long as, again, not to disparage those other guys, but as long as Ace, VJ, and Trey, kind of those dominoes fall.
So, Mason, did you have a follow-up? You're going to go there?
No. I think that's awesome. And so I'm just kind of thinking about when you say that, who's at 9 and 10 that feel like the next tier down, and kind of the implication there. But
sure. Yeah,
so
I think.
I guess before add to that, because I don't want to well, one, I don't want to move too far off Con, but I'll come back to Con in a second. But to add to that, like, is there, in your opinion, like a large differentiation between 7 and 10 or 7 and 13? Like, where is like the next quote unquote cliff in your mind?
Or better way of
y'all
asking my
talking
question.
y'all talking about in terms of like trading down if you wanted to do that?
Yeah, sure. In just terms of like value or like similar tier players or like, yeah, like for example, like, and we mentioned earlier on this pod, like, like it's, if Brooklyn calls, they're at 8 and they're like, we'll give you 27 and 8 to move up to 7 because we really love whoever's at 7. Like, there's probably not much of a functional difference, like in terms of like who's at 8. Like, where does the line stop? 10. Houston's at 10. What are you getting at 10 that's not there at 7?
Yeah, so it's very fluid, I would say. I think this is outside of the players that I've mentioned. And even Malawatch, I think, is a bit more controversial than meets the eye because I'm a bit lower on him in a vacuum, but he, like, you just look at like what Miles Turner's doing for the Pacers, like what Kaman, the very simple things he could do as a finisher and possibly as a shooter with being that size is just inherently very valuable, even though if I think it is more theoretical than real right now. But apart from the guys I've mentioned, there are players who could turn out to be, as good as that sort of third little cluster that I mentioned. It's just sort of, it's all eye of the beholder. So, I'm really interested to see how this combine goes. I mean, I think in future years, they should probably save the lottery for after the combine. It's just too much, especially for like a freak like me. It's just too much information all in an afternoon and then into an evening to get all that stuff. And they still haven't tested or scrimmaged or anything. But like, if you wanted to talk about wings, if you are looking to add a wing, I'm just going through my board here. So you've got Carter Bryant is a kid from Arizona, like athletic kid, very good defensive metrics, but really didn't do anything besides shoot threes this year. But he's an NBA athlete and an NBA player. You could take a shot on someone like him. If you wanted, what this class has in spades are guys who measure out just with absolutely insane frames and wingspans. So like Rasheer Fleming, I think is projected to go later, but he has a 7'5" wingspan and is 240 and looks like he can shoot just an absolute monster, kind of built like OG Anunoby, but not nearly OG's level of production in college. Murray Boils, like I mentioned, he's another one who has, if I were to like make another real pitch about someone who I think can handle like third starter or above level offensive usage at the NBA level, which is usually what you look for in a top 10 talent, Murray Boils is one who could, but like Khan, he doesn't fit the traditional mold. He's a guy who does not, like, he didn't really shoot threes. He tried to, but he's sort of an undersized big for South Carolina. And it took South Carolina a while because they played in a too big alignment and they weren't good. It took them a while to realize just how much better Murray Boils was than everybody on their team and that they should revolve their offense explicitly around getting him as many ISOs as possible. Because when they did that in the second half of their season in the SEC, nobody could guard him. Like he is, to me, the best rebounder in the draft, clearly. And after Harper, maybe, has the second best touch around the rim. Either hand, although, he favors his dominant hand, but like some insane mid-range touch finishes. He just hasn't stretched it out yet. And because he's so big, he measured with a 7-foot wingspan, 6'6", and 240 was what he came into the combine at. If you can get him in better, like, basketball condition, I know it's New Orleans. I'm going to just leave it at that. If you can get him in sort of like every night conditioning, he can be a monster. Like, you'll want that 3-point shot to arrive, but this is a kid who is a legit passer, can switch on defense. He was, again, the strongest kid at 19 years old. He's a sophomore, but he's freshman aged because he reclassified last year. So he's just turning 20 this summer. And he was like the biggest, baddest boy in the paint in the SEC, which is a lot of grown men. And he had a 67 true shooting percentage on insane usage and was the country's best rebounder. So that, like a guy like that, who again doesn't fit the typical mold as an undersized big who doesn't shoot threes, that is someone who I think will probably go between 7 and, I don't know, 12, maybe 7 and 14 if guys get really squeamish about the 3-point shot and the fit. But he's someone who I'd be happy with. There's no way he's not an NBA player. There's no way he doesn't stick around and like do really productive NBA things for a long time. It's just like he's not a central casting guy. And so that's why he's going to go probably later than he should.
So this is a question from one of our Discord guys. And he's asking if Colin is better than Grant Williams. So how do you comp Colin to Grant at Tennessee? Because Grant was also a very like buzzy player in that draft cycle. You know, I know a lot of people were really high on him because of his again, like this is a guy that had girth. He did a lot of different things on the basketball court. Tennessee was a good team. Him and Admiral Schofield, you know, like they kind of like they did their thing that year. But you know, in the NBA, he's been a different player than, you know, who he was at Tennessee. So how do you compare the two there? Because I know like the tendency is like these are Draymond archetypes, but like I just want to throw, like I know you don't say that, but like and this is more for the our listeners. I want to throw that just in the trash can, like to start with. Like there's no Draymond archetype. Like we're not going to make the Draymond comp at all. But how do you know where are Colin's strengths like relative to Grant's?
Very good question. I think first and foremost, in my opinion, he's a different level of physical talent than Grant. Even though Grant were both, like he and Grant are both very strong and they draw a lot of their sort of positional value from their strength. Grant, you guys can look it up, but I feel like he's like maybe 6'9" wingspan, that kind of area, maybe 6'10", but even so, I don't really think of him that way. And you know, Murray Boils, I think that he can switch onto guards better than Grant ever could. And Grant I don't even remember if Grant was injured this past year in Charlotte.
Yeah, he got hurt. Yeah, he did.
But like he's been a functional NBA player. He's you know, he gets bagged on because he can be a dork and like annoying, but he, you know, was a contributor on a team was he on the finals team in Boston or was he gone by that time? I feel like he was on.
They made plenty of deep runs at that. I think he was, but yeah, I mean, they at the very least made the conference finals like a ton with him, you know.
And he did that a lot through communication and just being in the right place, executing, you know, rotational responsibilities, and then eventually he learned to shoot. Murray Boils is more like he has more basketball talent in his hands. You know, it's just, and Grant had good touch at Tennessee. I don't want to sell him short. And I think he was like a 2-time SEC player of the year or something like that. But Murray Boils is essentially, in my opinion, he was the most talented player in the SEC this season in terms of like Trey Johnson will probably go ahead of him in the draft, but in terms of just a physical force that could not be guarded one-on-one, he was the best in the conference. And I don't think Grant, even at his best in Tennessee, commanded the sort of defensive attention that this kid does at 19 years old. I think that Murray Boils, I'm a bit lower on him defensively than his biggest fans are. You know, there are guys who think that he's among the best like switch defenders in the draft and stuff like that. I don't know that I'm quite there with him, because even though I think he's got the brain, because he's very smart and he's got like the hand strength and the hand placement, like if he gets a paw on the ball, it is dislodged. There's a crazy highlight that he had this year where he had a guy trapped in the near side, the strong side corner. And the guy tried to pass it out and he just caught the ball on the pass, like midair, just like, boop, and just took it and started going the other way. He has so much physical talent in his arms and in his hands that I really want to see his pace of play catch up to his process. He's the rare player who like thinks more quickly than he actually plays sometimes, because he liked to play very slow, because he would like to, when he gets into this ISO ball, even though he could pass out of it, when he gets into ISO ball, the game naturally slows down. And I think he was carrying a little bit of extra weight. And so, like, he should have been the most destructive transition force in the country. He should have been, as the best rebounder in the draft, grabbing and going coast to coast all game long and, like, running teams off the floor. And he didn't play that fast. He didn't do that. And that, like, I think that had to do a lot with his conditioning and with his preferred style of play. If you get him on an NBA floor with NBA talent and NBA finishers around him and NBA passers around him, and he's forced to up his conditioning, if there's that dimension there, he could be one of the like 3 or 4 best players in the draft. And with Grant, I don't think that upside was ever really there. I think Grant's appeal coming into the NBA was like a just sort of it feels weird knowing his reputation now, but just sort of like a professional guy who is going to come in, fit in, like be no nonsense and do what a coach asked him to do. You could build things around Colin's passing and his scoring touch and his driving ability that you could never build around Grant's skill set. So it might look, if he ends up never shooting threes and it's just like not there for him, he could have a similar career to Grant, I suppose. But in terms of as a prospect, what you can envision and like what pathways you can think about, he's just got more, in my opinion.
You know what's interesting is like when I watch him like ISO, especially like ISO off the wing, the player that I see the most is Julius Randle. I'm like, I watched like Randle do this a million times in New Orleans. I watched him do it in New York. I'm watching him doing it in, obviously he's doing a lot less of it. Like in Minnesota, I think he's kind of like really figured out like, hey, I don't have to commandeer the offense. Like that's Ant's job. Like I can play the connective like gaps. I can do the playmaking. I can fill in all the gaps that Ant isn't filling in. And Randle was a guy who had no 3-point shot coming in. Worked tirelessly. I think his first 4 years, like barely even attempted like threes. And then worked tirelessly. And then all of a sudden, like he became a volume guy in New York. And ever since then, he's just kind of launched him. And he's clearly someone that's, again, put a ton of work into his body from a conditioning standpoint, tries to make himself available at all times in that shot. So I'm like, do you see a pathway to being a Randle type player offensively, at least?
Sure. Yeah. I think Randle coming out, and I wasn't as big into the draft stuff, in that year. I think it was 2014 was Randle's year.
Yeah.
But I remember, from what I recall, Randle was, first of all, he was like a big time recruit. And Murray Boils was known, but not to the degree. Like Randle was a Kentucky top 10 guy. Yeah. And I think there was still, even though Kentucky used him in the post a lot, there was still like, you saw the flashes of when he actually got to move and you could see him out in transition, like how destructive he was ultimately going to be. And I think his conditioning, like I think his body type was a little bit more NBA ready, or at least was easier for evaluators, easier for evaluators to swallow than Murray Boils is right now. Because like there's just the way he is built is just very, very unique. I wouldn't throw around, Charles Barkley necessarily. I don't think that's appropriate because Barkley was a transition monster. But in terms of how guys like bounce off of him and like how he just clears the glass when he wants a rebound, like it's really impressive stuff. And I think if I'm projecting where his offensive game is going to go, I don't know that he will ever have the volume shooting from three that Randall does, because I think Randall is still at a certain point a little bit taller. I think Randall probably runs like 6'8" in socks, and Murray Boils is around 6'6". And he always had, I think, a bit more fluidity in his shot form. Murray Boils can speed his up, but his release is still pretty slow.
Yeah.
But I think that Murray Boils is more gifted, or I guess maybe equally as gifted as a passer. And I think his finishing touch is maybe even a little bit better. And that's what you have to rely on. Like, this is a guy in draft prospects now. It is worrying if they don't have 3-point volume, but you really want to be worried if they don't have 3-point volume and they've been trying to shoot threes because they've needed to try. He hasn't necessarily needed to try because he's so dominant around the rim. And so he can stick with what has worked
He
for
shot
him.
62% on twos. That's just
On
twos.
On a lot of twos. I mean,
almost 10 a game.
Twos. Yeah, 10 twos a game. That's all you need to know. Yeah. So that's in big boy country in the SEC. He got the better of Janai Broom, I thought, last year as an 18-year-old when Janai was, only 22.
Is that how I've been calling him Johnny?
Really?
Yeah. I don't know why, but Broom, cool.
Yeah. This year, South Carolina didn't win many games, but they should have beaten Auburn. They kind of choked at the end of that game, but he took it to him again. He's a big problem for anybody to deal with. And if they had an actual team around him, and it's not to say that he doesn't have stuff in game that he can improve on, because he does have his warts, but if they had a real team around him, he would have been like a first or second team All-American, no problem. You really would have been.
I want to talk about there's 3 prospects that we haven't touched on that all kind of fall into this different kind of bet, or as you would call a dart throw.
That's right.
And the guys I'm talking about are creators. And 3 guys that I think I've seen people high on in various degrees as upside bets in the creation space are Jeremiah Fears, Kasparis Yakosonus, and Egor Demon. And those are 3 guys, depending on which mock that you look at, are also in this 5 to 10 range or 5 to 12 range, whatever. But like in the range that the Pelicans feasibly might be selecting. Just want to get your thoughts on those 3 guys as prospects, but also just kind of like, what are their pathways towards, can they return? I guess, can these be guys that return you inordinate amount of value? Because as you mentioned, some of the guys that really tend to pop later on in drafts, like later on in it, are guys that either find their shooting at a very, very high level, or guys that can provide you value in another space, which ends up usually being creation in one way or another.
Yeah, so very good question. I think the way I'd look at it is that if you have a creator, you want to have them do something that makes it extremely obvious that they can be like a starter at the NBA level. Like, you don't want to have to squint with point guards, generally, because the NBA is so loaded at guard, and they have so many gifted wings who can cosplay as a guard, that if you're a pure point, if you're a pure one, you better be like the goods. Like, you better be one of the best shooters in the country, and you better have some positional size or something to make it very, very clear. And I think with each of those 3, like, they all have stuff to recommend about them. Like, they each have like tasty parts to their games. Yakosonus is probably like the best orchestrator and the best maestro of the 3. Fears probably has the best bag and is sort of like physically the strongest out of the 3, and is the most traditional kind of handler, and I don't want to quite say shot maker because his shot didn't go in enough. But he's like a hooper who can pass. And Igor's like the oversized point guard who's, athletically not quite where you'd want him to be. The shot isn't quite where you'd want him to be, but he's really big. I would say if I'm looking at one of those three to return big time value where they are not only starting in the NBA, but they are reliably helping their team beat other very good guard groups and win games against those guys. I would look for the one who has the most off-ball value, because no matter how good they're going to be, they're going to split reps with probably one or two or three offensive options more gifted than they are. And on that front, Yakosonus would be the pick out of those three. Not that Fears can't be a good catch and shoot shooter. Igor, I think, is, as far as shooting off the ball, he has a long way to go. But Fears and Yakosonus could both be good at it. It's just Fears, he clocked in at like 6'2" with like a 6'5" wingspan. You're just swimming up
79 pounds. Yeah.
Yeah. It's just very hard. And Yakosonus has a bit more size. And for a while, at the start of the season, Yak was absolutely on fire. And when I scouted him early in the season, I thought that his release, both off the catch and especially off the dribble, was very, very fast. And even though he is not, the world's best athlete either, I mean, all these kids are young. They all were 18 when the season started. But Yakosonus had a real talent for punishing mistakes. He wasn't the best at creating separation, and he wasn't the best at converting around the rim. But if a defender, if their footwork was slightly off, or if they were reaching just a little bit, Yakosonus would pick up on that very quickly and either get by them or more frequently get a foul call over and over and over again. For someone who was not the craziest athlete, like his grift game was exceptionally strong. And so even though he slumped in the second half of the season, I think he was banged up a little bit too. I think his true shooting was still around like 59, which for a freshman guard is really, really good. His turnovers persisted, but when he doesn't bear so much of a burden at the NBA level and he plays off the ball more and he's more of a connecting playmaker, those turnovers will come down. So I think if you wanted to get really bullish on Yakosonus, you would look at how Austin Reeves, his college career, he started as an off-ball player at Wichita State. And he was like in the 99th percentile as a catch and shoot player his couple of years there. Then he transfers to Oklahoma, becomes an on-ball guy. Assist percentage goes up, 3-point percentage comes down, turnovers go up as like the usage skyrockets. He's still effective, but as he's coming into his own, there's a give and take. And now you see what kind of a shooter he is now that he's playing, alongside stars. I think that's the sort of thing. And Yakosonus is better as a freshman than Reeves was. So if you want to get really excited, you would say it would be something like that. And so he would be the one out of those three because he can marry the on and the off ball the best to me as the guy to get excited about.
No, that's I think that's really insightful. Reeves is a comp that I've made for Yakosonus in our Discord and in other places, and I think that's a very interesting pathway. I'm curious to see if we're gonna get like any like the lane agility and like these other kind of numbers throughout the combine, because then you can kind of see if there's any kind of significant mobility differences between the two, or if there's any kind of like real issues there.
Mm-hmm.
I don't like fully buy into those numbers, but like to me, they can be useful because when you have a situation like, for example, Zach Edey, who I think you and I were both really high on last year, when he comes to the combine and he does those mobility drills and his numbers like blow out everyone that is comparable to his size, then you're like, okay, yeah, this idea of him being a slow plodding big, like maybe doesn't hold as much weight as his biggest detractors want you to believe. I mean, he's not the fastest guy in the world. We all know that. But it's like, can this guy be viable, because of these numbers? And I think that's kind of like what you're looking at there. There are a couple other players that I kind of want to pick your brain about. I want to bring us back to Kaman for a little bit, and I want to get an understanding of what makes you so high on him. And then there's a mystery box in France, Noah Essenge.
I think it's Essenge. Yeah. I
Yeah.
think that's how you say it, but we're probably both wrong. Yeah.
Who's had a much better stretch recently, in terms of productivity. And this is your typical like toolsy mystery box that like, is he productive? Like if he really hits, man, this guy's a fluid athlete at an incredible size. So just want to like two guys that are very much the big selling points that jump off the page are their physical tools. Like what do you make of these two players?
Sure. I'm actually going to throw a third in there, which is Danny Wolf from Michigan.
Yes.
But
A lot of the chat's been talking about Wolf here. I'm going to just pull up some of the comments. Yeah.
Yeah. So first of all, for Kaman, I mentioned a little bit earlier, but like the appeal is still theoretical because even though he shot free throws pretty well, he didn't really shoot any threes, but you have to imagine that he's going to be shooting threes. He came from
why is that?
Because he came from an academy in Africa that like taught all its bigs to shoot threes. I don't know if you got a glimpse of Ulrich Shomshi. He was like the really young kid who was taken in the second round by the Raptors last year. That like they came up through that same training program together, and it was all that is what they were teaching them to do. I didn't really watch any of his South Sudan tape from the Olympics last year, but like the best thing he did to me was not protect the rim at Duke. It was as a vertical threat on offense and as a lob finisher. You mentioned Murray Boils, 62% on twos on a bajillion attempts. Kaman on much fewer attempts was like 75% from two. Like there is being a rim runner, and then there's Kaman Malawatch in terms of his effectiveness at doing it and how much defensive attention it drew. I think like the main reason that Duke did not crush Houston in that game, and eventually, they blew it. They should have won it anyway. But the reason that game was close to begin with was because Houston was extremely physical with Kaman, and Duke had gotten into the habit over the course of the tournament of using him as a release valve. If there was any sort of like stifling to a driving lane or to a first or second action, Flagg or Knipple or Proctor or whoever it was just got in the habit of throwing it up to Malawatch because they had such faith that he was going to be there and finish. And Houston was the team with the like defenders, like the grown man defenders, to knock him off his spots and make it very uncomfortable. But in the NBA, where there's space and everyone is super talented, like guarding a Malawatch pick and roll dive like lob game is going to be exceptionally difficult to do. So he's going to belong on an NBA floor right away. Once he gets the green light, which should happen shortly after that, to shoot threes, and if his free throw touch holds up, then you have like a really, I wouldn't say like necessarily versatile in terms of the breadth of his skill set, but you just have such value of a guy of that size being able to do either thing that the defense, which I think is further away, and I think is a bit overrated. He is big and he did get his blocks and everything, but he's still very much learning his assignments, and you can see his wheels turning a little bit. And you can see guys go at him in certain moments and get the better of him, both in the post or guards attacking downhill. I think the defense, you would hope, sort of gets better year over year with his awesome physical tools. He's also apparently like a great kid, and so you hope the work habits, like it all sort of synthesizes and he puts that together. But that the offensive stuff just, in the meantime, patches over, and eventually you get like a really, really good, Brooke Lopez-y kind of player, but maybe even a little bit bigger than Brooke. With Noah, so I've been watching Noah a lot recently. I would say kind of like Malawatch. I think his defensive tools and viability are a bit overrated. Not that they're not there, because he is like an oversized wing with plenty of length, and he can cover ground. I mean, when he if he wants to blitz a pick and roll, or if he wants to switch out onto a guard, like you see him in the German league, which is like a decent league, not amazing, but fine. And like the guards are they are shocked that he gets there as quick as he does. Like you can see him really disrupting things just through very simple basketball ground coverage motions. But his soul is on offense. When the more I watch him, I don't think, even though I think he's competitive, he's not a psycho competitor. He's not the level of, I'm not comparing him to Flagg as a prospect, but he's not the level of Flagg just even with his motor. He's not the level of Tari Eason's motor. Like, he's not someone who decides I'm going to be a game wrecker on defense. He competes, and I think he can be physical, and he knows what he's doing enough to where he's not lost. All that stuff is good. But on offense is more where I see him kind of try stuff a little bit more, and the stuff that he tries is all kind of, okay, it's a lot of that.
A lot of Usman Jing, huh?
Kinda, yeah, but in a different way, because with Usman, Usman would shy away from contact. That was his problem. Noah's the opposite, but it's the only thing he can do. The best thing that Noah can do is drive into people, and he gets fouled all the time because everyone's like, what the hell is this? And so they're not in position and they foul him. And his arms are so long, so much of his body is arms that they just foul him. And he draws loose ball fouls on rebounds and stuff. So that is why he gets to stay on the floor. And he shows flashes of shooting threes, and he's fluid enough that you can project his form to be high volume enough. He won't have a problem getting them off. Whether or not they go in, we'll see. I like his free throw form. I think the ball comes off his hands very soft, and I think that there's nothing really broken about his form. But graveyard is littered with intriguing guys. You're I bet he becomes a 36% 3-point shooter. I'm not going to quite go there with Noah, but you can certainly see the appeal. I just wish that his motor ran a little bit hotter. I was not Risiché's biggest fan in the draft last year in terms of, being a number one pick, but there was no denying his motor all of the time that he played with. And if you're going to be a role player, which is what Risichet always sort of cast himself as, you better have that. You better take pride in the things that will make you an NBA role player. Noah, I mean, he's so young. He's as young as Cooper Flagg. He turns 19 in December. So who knows? There's plenty of room for growth. But I don't quite see the same level of let's go with him, And that I wish I did. I wish he were more of a maniac on defense. I wish when he got beat off the dribble, he would try to recover hard and make a play from the backside, but he doesn't really. I just wish there was a bit more shit to him. But he could grow to prove me wrong, very possibly. But he's gotten Jeremy Grant comps, and as another guy who has defensive tools, but has always sort of fancied himself more of an offensive present that's just wrapped up and needs to be unwrapped. I can sort of see that a similar arc, I should say, which is not a bad arc. I mean, Jeremy Grant's had a nice career, but there's a reason that Jeremy has ended. He's kind of chosen more losing situations as he's gotten older and into his prime, because he sort of wanted to be the guy. I don't know that Noah will ever have the talent offensively that Jeremy had to justify a bad team giving him that runway. But I could see a similar thing happening. And with Wolf, I will just say Wolf is 6'10 plus in socks, 7'2 wingspan, was on a good team, went toe-to-toe with Derek Queen in a couple games and got plenty on Derek. Like, they went at each other. And he has legitimate guard skills. Where lots of stuff with Noah is theoretical, Wolf is concrete. He can handle legitimately at his size. He can certainly pass legitimately at his size, either off the dribble or as a connecting passer. And he can shoot even off the dribble at his size. And he played with another big. I don't think that Danny is necessarily a starting center in the NBA, like defensively, but guys who are that just giant, who have legitimate guard skills, are hard to find and hard to replicate. And because Danny looks the way he looks, and he looks like a goof, like that means, and because he's a transfer from Yale, he's not a blue chip prospect, I think that consensus, while people like him, they are lower on him than they should be. I could see Danny like returning Lotto value in this draft, and I very much doubt that he goes in the Lotto. So those guard skills are hard to find. And if you're talking about where the NBA is going, it's about having guard skills at as many positions as you possibly can while maintaining positional size. And Danny checks those boxes. So I would keep him in mind as well.
Who have we seen in the NBA that moves like Danny or does the things that Danny? Because it's like, okay, he's a big with guard skills, and we've seen bigs that pass. The Pelicans have one that Danny gets a lot of comps in terms of Kelly Olynyk. I frankly think he's got way more like pick and roll operator capacity than Kelly Olynyk ever had. Just the ability to not only like make reads, but also like draw two, and then just like the whole package when it comes to like operating pick and roll. But it would require a coaching staff taking, my seat is descending, so I'm like sinking into the thing. I have like a broken seat here. It's like boop 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 boop. I get shorter as the podcast goes on. But one, it requires a coaching staff to have belief in Danny and empowering him to be that player, because someone at that size operating a pick and roll the way he does is uncommon, right? There's players that do it, but it's uncommon. So have we seen someone at the NBA level that's doing what you theoretically think he can do?
Franz, baby, but I'm not gonna go there. I think the NBA is littered with like oversized wings, guys who are like legit wings who do it. Danny is just more of a big because I guess of his movement limitations, though I think he is an underrated positional defender. Like, I think he's fine, but there's a line between scarcity, which you really want in the draft, guys who you're not going to find draft class over draft class, and novelty. You want scarcity, you want to avoid novelty. Kenneth Lofton is not a player you find draft class to draft class, but he's a bit more of a novelty. Same with like David Roddy.
That's the exact person I was thinking of.
Big
body Roddy.
But like now it needs to translate to the NBA game. And the way that Danny can weaponize NBA space, the way that I project him to weaponize NBA space, is going to be valuable. And I think tilts much more towards scarcity than it does novelty. And that's why I think that he could be really, really good. He's a better, it sounds weird to compare because the hype is so much different, but he is a better passer clearly off the dribble than Ace Bailey. He has better guard skills than Ace Bailey. He's bigger than Ace Bailey. Got a longer wingspan.
61 pounds. I'm
just like, and Ace is going to go, I think, in the top 5. And I think that's, hopefully he goes to a situation that's good for him and he can grow year over year. Ace might also have like some physical gains to make because Ace is very young.
Sure.
But like, if you're comparing those two guys about who was the better player this year more consistently, I think it was probably Danny, and he'll probably go 15 picks later. So like, there is definitely value. There's lots of biases come draft time, but the biggest one is usually anchoring bias. Like what evaluators thought coming into the season, it is very hard to move them, myself included. But like guys who especially study grassroots and stuff like that, and who are in the NBA, they get their sights set on a guy early or on a group of guys early, and the media, the hype doesn't help matters. And it just it sets in concrete things that should not be in concrete. Like you have to be open to the results that you see. And you watch Michigan play Maryland, watch what he did with Derek Queen, those two going at each other, and you won't see two guys that are like wildly far apart. So like, I don't know. That's my Danny Wolf spiel. I think that he is a very, very real NBA talent who can, like, if you set him an inverted pick and roll, whether he's playing at 4 or 5 and he gets a smaller guy on him and he can bully him with his size, like he's going to cause people problems. So I like Danny a lot.
I'm with you. I think, you and I tend to share a lot of commonalities when it comes to like gravitating towards certain prospects and what we think is going to end up being successful. And I think you're spot on about like, the anchoring bias. A lot of people, I think, don't update their priors quickly enough because, you're operating with such small data samples to begin with that the data that's new and coming in is very quickly dating the old data that may have formed the original opinion. And you see it all the time, especially when players do make that jump to the NBA and they've been NBA players for 2-3 seasons, and you have people still referring to what they did at the EYBL or they did it at the high school level, and you're just like, that sample is just so irrelevant now relative to what we've seen in the NBA. You just can't view the guy in the same way. You just can't. And I think a lot of people struggle to update their philosophies on that. But with regards,
I want to mention one more thing that you said that I apologize for not following up on, but you said a coaching staff would have to empower Danny. There are prospects that in order to work out, you need to empower. I think Noah Esenge is one of those guys, because if a coaching staff like puts him in the corner because his guard skills are not advanced enough, they're going to be disappointed because he's not going to be a knockdown shooter and he's going to lose minutes. They're going to bench him. But if you have guard skills the way that Danny Wolf has, you actually have them. You don't need a coaching staff to necessarily empower you because it will just come out in your game. You'll have so much comfort on the ball and you'll be so used to making those decisions with confidence that eventually it will be undeniable. And that's really the differentiator. So I actually think like he's not totally like situation proof. No one really is outside of the top, 2 guys in the draft, but he will rise. He will rise no matter where he goes. And it will become evident that like he has real deal chops.
No, I'm with you. I think so far in like kind of like all the takes that you've given on the players, like I align with them like pretty closely. I think the Pelicans certainly are going to have choices to make on whether they want to stay at 7 or how they want to approach the whole Zion situation. I guess I've taken a lot of your time, and I'm going to probably ask you back later on in this process when things start getting more clear, because we can talk shop for days. Like we haven't even gotten to any ideas of like, the second round pick or like undrafted players. And, like that's when it gets really, really fun. I'm going to ask about one more player that I think is a popular name that kind of like pops up, has popped up in the chat, and that's Ryan Kalkbrenner. And Ryan is someone who measured extremely well today. I think he was nearly 7'1" in socks. Like, what were the exact measurements? Hold on, let me see if I can find it.
Yeah, wingspan, I believe 7'6" plus. I think.
I mean, he was just, it was unbelievable how big he ended up measuring. So, how do you view his game, and how would you compare his general like mobility to someone like Walker Kessler? Because I bring up Kessler. Kessler was a very, very impactful player um, when he was in college, and there was like detractors because like, oh, he's a one position big who doesn't really shoot. I mean, yeah, there was this idea that he might take threes, and he's taken a few threes with the Jazz. It took a lot more when they were tanking. But it was like, okay, well, Kessler's just this like standard, bog standard, huge big that rebounds and blocks shots, is probably only ever going to play and drop. How valuable is that archetype? And I think we're quickly realizing now that that archetype is still very, very valuable, and that NBA defenses are still built on the back of drop bigs. And what teams are now doing is they're supplementing these drop bigs with more mobile and bigger forwards and perhaps another big. So where are you at with Ryan, and are you like, was his measurement as surprising as it was to me? And yeah, just how do you see him in the NBA context?
Yeah, it was surprising. I mean, that it was that extreme. Like anytime you see nowadays, anything over 7'5", you're like, ooh, okay. In the same way that Wolf's teammate Vlad Golden, was over 7'5" wingspan. That was another one. He and Kalkbrenner both. So he's been Big East Defensive Player of the Year multiple times. I don't know how many times he's won it, but he won it this year. I would say that he's a good pick, especially if you can get him in the second round. I mean, if he were to last that far. I actually don't know where he has been mocked most recently. I don't know if you have that, but I'd say that the question with him is what sort of like, how many minutes do you envision him playing? And if you want to like essentially cap it at 20 to 25 a night where he comes in and he's on spot duty, then I think he could do his job very well in drop, cleaning the glass, and just sort of engaging in that two-man game, and that's fine. I mean, NBA guards are really, really good at attacking drop, but over the course of the regular season, he'll win his fair share of battles. If you think that he has a pathway like Walker to like potentially become a starter, I would push back on that only because, Walker, that defense at Auburn, he spent 1 year at Auburn, and Jabari Smith was there as well when he was there. But that was the best defense in the country, and Walker was a sophomore, and he basically set a modern day NCAA record for block rate. I mean, he had 17, 18, 19% block rate. And Ryan's good. I mean, it
was 19.1.
Yeah, it's just absolutely ridiculous.
Which translates to 4.6 per game in just 25 minutes a game.
Yeah, I think he got like one or two triple doubles like with blocks in that season, just complete Looney Tunes. And so there's just levels to that sort of a player. I think Ryan has always been a good rim protector with good touch. I think his three-pointer has been, maybe a little bit overstated, but it's something that could grow and get better the more he spots up at the NBA level. And he has enough of a theory. He shot, looks like, just looking here, probably around like 73% from the line for his career. I mean, there's enough there to certainly take a shot on.
Well, he shot 70% or 71% on twos, and we talk about a lot of twos. He took what was the number, 10.1 a game this year, and he's led his conference in field goal percentage the last 4 years. He's led the Big East in field goal percentage in the last 4 years.
Yeah, and he's never like they've never built an offense around him. The usage has never really been up there, but Baylor Shireman was there for a couple years, overlapping with him. Like he's an NBA player. Like I always had a fondness for Colin Castleton when he came out, and he sort of is bouncing around the NBA on the fringes with a similar sort of theory. But Ryan is like a better physical specimen than Colin was. And I think when you see how like Jay Huff kind of popped this year a little bit as a real NBA rotation player for the Grizzlies, a slightly different kind of athlete, but I think Ryan is a better physical specimen than him as well. It's the sort of thing where like the NBA team that gets him is going to give him the freedom to tee off from three. And if like almost how Edie like started shooting threes and shot like 40% on threes this year, like you could see that was a dimension of his game that just wasn't fully teased out at Purdue.
I mean, you have to, if you have someone with that size and
Yeah.
that kind of theoretical rim deterrent ability, like I feel like every smart NBA team is just like, we're just gonna throw darts at these bigs, and when that shooting clicks, because it's a matter of time, right? It depend if you throw enough darts. When you find one with enough size and that shooting, like we talk about the return on value. The return on value on those guys is just inordinate. Like
it's you are much better off drafting a Kalkbrenner or Maxime Reynaud, who's not the defensive center that Kalkbrenner is, but as a shooter and as like a driver of the ball, like he can legitimately attack closeouts at 7 feet. Like a Kalkbrenner, a Reynaud, a Golden, all these guys who are like have clearly demonstrated defensive value in college, who have at least a shooting theory. Like you draft those guys every time if they're still on the board outside, the top 20 or so, as opposed to just taking a wish on like an imperfect guard who's probably going to wash out of the league because they have enough warts to be drafted where they are. So yeah, I think very, very worthwhile. And we'll see if Ryan can work himself into a first round conversation. Certainly possible. I think teams will want to see how he scrimmages because theoretically that's an environment where he should really thrive. But yeah, very interesting guy to see during Combine Week for sure.
The last one, and I just want a 30 seconds feel on this guy. Sorber, 7'6" wingspan on Sorber. Also another guy that measured in with like I think over 250 pounds, which is like impressive for someone that was not quite 6'10". He went down with a foot injury that's going to require surgery, something that's always tricky with bigs moving forward. But yeah, if you just give 30 seconds on Sorber, and then we'll just wrap it up.
Well, one of the weirdest players in the draft. I have not come down with a concrete opinion on Sorber yet because he's like 6'9" with a 7'6" wingspan. Like you just don't see like +9s. It just doesn't happen. But one of the biggest dogs, like hardest players, just bell to bell, horn to horn in the class. High feel, very high feel for a big, like surprisingly good passer. The question is the shooting, and whether, because he's undersized, and as an undersized big, he's probably going to need to shoot. But for a freshman aged kid, like you're not going to shoot 37% on threes if you have a 7'6" wingspan and you're 19 years old, because they're just like, there's only been like 5 of those guys even shooting threes in NCAA history. So I think that there is I have to do my film review, but I think there's a good chance that there's a long tail to his development curve where his like 3rd, 4th, 5th year in the league, you combine that sort of length and box score productivity and effort with a willingness to shoot, you could get to some pretty interesting places. So I like Sorber.
One of the guys, actually the guy asking this question made was how closely does he resemble Wendell, not college Wendell, but like what we see from like Wendell now.
Yeah, interesting. I've been a bit like softer on Wendell than most. I think I can see the comparison, but I think Sorber is like I think he plays even a little bit with a bit more edge than Wendell does. He is in terms of just motor and just overall desire to overwhelm you. I think Sorber is really, really up there, like right after Flagg in the class. So
Wow.
I don't want to go. You never want to lean too hard on intangibles.
Sure.
Tangibles matter. They tend to matter a lot.
Yeah.
So I don't want to go too far into intangible land because the ball does need to go in the hoop for him. That is the reality, and he is not the most like blessed athletic mover.
Right.
But I would find it, especially with those measurements, I'd be stunned if he did not stick around. It's just a matter of finding a role that he can consistently, if not dominate in, then like consistently contribute at a predictably good level, as opposed to it just being up and down because you never know if, the ball's going to go in or not.
Man, that makes Sorber a really exciting prospect because when I watched him, I was like, this guy is a grade A irritant just because of how hard he plays.
Yeah.
It's just like like you kind of see it with like Lou Dort, right? You're just like, this guy just everywhere. It's just obnoxious. He's physical, like he's like under your skin at every possible moment, and he's just making everything difficult. And that was the impression. I was like the big man version of that. Obviously, like I'm just talking about in terms of like personality and like the like how they play rather than skill sets. But that was like when I watched him, I was like, yeah, this guy seems like he'd be incredibly annoying to play against. And so we'll see. I mean, I think there's some value there just because of that broken foot and I love that we got to cover a wide range of these prospects because I do think there is a world where the Pelicans get a second pick in this draft, or they decide to move back and they're like, okay, maybe we got two. We're looking at, I don't know. I mean, the Pelicans, they did that in the Trey Murphy year. They had the 10th pick, didn't love that was there. They ended up moving off some salary. They dropped the 17. They got traded. Worked out really well for them. There's situations where I can see something similar here. They have that DeJounte contract on their books. If you end up being a team that does move Zion, you don't really have a rush to move DeJounte. But if you've made the assessment on a dude at like 17 or somewhere in that range, and you're like, cool, like I can move off DeJounte and move 7, and there's someone there that I like, maybe these are the type of guys to look at, the Danny Wolfs of the world or the Thomas Sorbers. I know for a fact, Joe Dumars and Troy Weaver love the idea of being big and skilled. They love the idea of being big and skilled. Like Joe's going on record since he's been hired in the Pelicans, and he's pointed to the league moving to 2 big configurations. Troy very clearly attempted that during his time in Detroit. So like again, I think these are 2 executives that are going to throw darts in these situations, and this draft is fascinating enough to where there's some darts to throw here.
Certainly. I'd like to see if they become connected to Murray Boils, because he also is not the traditional big, because he's literally, 6'6" in socks. But if not, yeah, I think Sorber, now that you mention it, because that's exactly right in terms of what those guys have prioritized, I'd look for Sorber for them. I mean, that's going to be hard for them to pass up if they have a chance to add him to their team. Seems like the kind of guy they would fall in love with and maybe trade back in to go get if the opportunity presented itself.
Right. Yeah. I mean, and especially because you're not worried about developing too many people at once. You could kind of redshirt him next year if you need to,
Right.
I don't know what the situation is with his
right.
foot, but I would assume you just bring him along slowly, all that kind of stuff. But yeah, I mean, Chuck, I greatly appreciate you hopping on short notice and blessing us with your time. Where can the folks find you?
I'm at Chucking Darts on Twitter. I'm at chuckingdartsnba.bsky.social on Blue Sky. That's where I do most of my like draft clips. If you want to see me like give thoughts on the stuff I'm watching, it's Blue Sky. More general commentary is on Twitter. My podcast is wherever you find them. My Substack, I think, is chuckingdarts.substack.com. I try to update that stuff when I can. Free time is hard to come by, but I will always make time for you because you've done such a generous job making time for me. So anytime you need me, I will be here. Thank you.
Appreciate you, Chuck, and I appreciate everyone who tuned in to this live show. Definitely check out his podcast. Like, he brings on some of the most informative draft people that dedicate their time to like really watching these prospects and understanding them, and they think about them in such a thoughtful way because a lot of people try to like analyze draft prospects within like, how would this person stack up against the 7th pick, so blah blah blah. And I'm like, yeah, there's a fair amount of that, but like, these people really bring it in terms of evaluating outliers, evaluating the context around their successes, pathways to successes, and just they have a great time doing it too. So, Chuck, thank you for your time. Appreciate everyone for tuning in, and till next time, everybody.